Hi there, I'm Carrie Ellis, author of 21st Century Superhuman. This is our 21st Century Superhuman show, and we are in the midst of a series called Critical Things You Must Know to Be a 21st Century Superhuman. And today I have with me my dear friend, Dr. Michael Ryce. Hey, Michael.
Hey, delighted to be here.
Awesome to have you here today.
Thank you.
Michael wrote the foreword to our book, 21st Century Superhuman, and we have honored each other's work for probably over 30 years. Michael is moderator of a document called the Khabouris Manuscript, a 168 AD Aramaic document that changed the course of his life and began his teaching of what a real true understanding of how our minds and hearts operate in this world. And Michael, your work is amazing. I love it. I'm excited to hear what you have to share with us today. We're in part 3 of this series, and I think this material will fit in really well. So do you want to share just a little? I know you work with a number of translators around the world too. You're not the translator, but you've been able to bring forward this material in a really user-friendly way, and something that you say, if we had understood this 2,000 years ago, we'd be living in a different culture right now. So we're aiming towards a culture founded in love where humanity lives in peace with enough for all. So why don't you go ahead and share with us a little bit about what you're up to?
Well, probably the first thing to look at is that everybody in the world is living a life exactly as they want it to be. Their lives are precisely the way that they want their lives to be. And most people are like, wait a minute, you don't tell me that. That's ridiculous. You haven't been reading my mail. This isn't the way I want it to be. Well, the challenge is that most people don't know where their wanter is or how it works. If you look into the Ancient Aramaic, and actually the manuscript goes back to about 164 AD, and there's no actual translation work being done on it right now. It's kind of on hold. There has been some editing done recently. And what we've looked to do is to decode the first century words in the Aramaic language of a culture. For instance, the Persian culture lived for 3,000 years under the Aramaic language without a war with any of its neighbors. And so what we've worked to do is to understand the first century meanings of those words and how this whole process of creatorship works. When you look at the idea that we're made in the image and likeness of the Creator, and that the Creator, of course, creates, then we must, by nature, be creators.
So did you say they lived for 3,000 years under the Aramaic language without having war with their neighbors?
Without a war for 3,000 years.
That is so cool. I never heard that. That's very cool.
Yeah, powerful.
I don't know, for some reason we keep getting like a little wave of sound. It must be something in our connection, because I'm in Costa Rica and you're in Florida, so we're going to just keep talking through it, and I apologize for the little dissonance.
All right. Well, maybe I'll bring, does that make it any clearer? Maybe if I hold this microphone, is it looking different from your end?
Possibly. Just go ahead.
Okay. So then, recognizing that there's a level of the mind where power tends to accumulate, it's actually an unnatural level of mind for a human being. And it was spoken about 2,000 years ago in the Aramaic, but because we don't have definitions of those words, I love what Vladimir Lenin says. He says, one of the few things I admire about what Lenin said, he says, if you can change the meaning of a culture's words, you can destroy that culture. So we hear this statement being made 2,000 years ago, and the Greeks translated as take care of the heart, for out of it are the issues in life. And you go, what does that mean? Does that mean my little pump here in my chest sets up all the issues in my life? No, of course it doesn't mean that. You've got to get back to those first century Aramaic meanings. And virtually every key word and every key concept out of those first century teachings has been turned around inside out, upside down, and backward from the Aramaic. You know, why can't you transfer a culture, as Lenin says, if you change the meaning of that culture's words? Because culture in the human realm is transferred primarily by words. You change the meaning of words and the culture is not transferable. And so, you know, let's imagine, just for an example, let's imagine that that you are the best translator of Russian into English and English into Russian on the planet. And we're doing a set of workshops. Here I am in Allenton, Florida. But let's imagine you're here and you have a home. And I say, gee, contact him over for that workshop series. And I know you've got an extra room in your house. Could you house him and translate for him? Because I don't speak any Russian. He said, of course, I'd love to. That'd be awesome. And so he comes over and, we do a week of workshops. We have dinner a couple of times. We get together for lunch. We have a really great time with this guy. And at the end of the week, I say, Carrie, I just really want this guy to know what I think about him. Would you tell him that I think he's really cool? And you turn to him in your best Russian and you say, Michael thinks you've got a low body temperature. Translated my words perfectly, but you didn't say a word about what I meant. The Aramaic language is an idiomatic language. And in an idiomatic language, you don't translate words, you have to translate idioms. And so a statement was made about this thing called the heart. In Aramaic, take care of the heart for other the issues in life. And up until just a few decades ago in the West, we couldn't translate that word. 2,000 years, we didn't know what the word meant because we had no such concept until Freud, who, interestingly enough, got a Nobel Prize for discovering the unconscious. No more discovered, it can fly in the air. It is fully described, it is fully understood, and the syntax of the language in Aramaic includes the unconscious mind. And so what Yeshua was saying 2,000 years ago is, take care what's in your unconscious because that's where your wanter is. That's where the power is. And that's how you create what happens in your life. So if you put hate into your unconscious, then hate is going to show up in your world. It's a creative process. That's just the way it works. You put fear into the unconscious, and that's the way it works. You get things to fear. That's creatorship. And so there are, if you look at this, and we're on key number 3, correct, of the 21st century superhuman ideas, well, 2,000 years ago, Yeshua gave 6 keys for being a first century superhuman. No different than a 21st century superhuman.
Wow, that is awesome.
He just did it 2,000 years ago.
I love that.
Same thing.
Cool.
You hear the purpose of his word, and you think from the way people talk about him. Classically, his name is mistranslated, interesting, into Jesus. Wasn't his name at all. His name is Yeshua. And it gives a really crisp, clear definition of why he's here. And I would suspect that this would probably fit a description of your book. Why do you share that book with people? Do you share that book to bring them life and bring it more abundantly? Would that be an accurate definition of a 21st century superhuman? Somebody with abundant life? So go back to Yeshua 2,000 years ago. He says, I come to bring you life and bring it more abundantly. Absolutely. Here's how you do it, folks. Here's how it's done.
Yes.
And if Yeshua sat in most circles where they're speaking about Yeshua's words today, he'd say, that's all Greek to me. Because the Greeks took it over, they killed his body, and then they killed his teaching. They disappeared him. Because kings don't want us to know how creation works. Because kings can't co-opt our creative process through unconscious dynamics and run our lives and reap the wealth from us. So if we're going to actually function as humans, real, true, actual humans, and compared to what's called human life today, it's difficult to even find human life on the planet today. Actually living as a human being, and we have a simple experiential definition of the word human in this work that we've developed. And it's an experiential definition because the head can't contain words big enough to describe human life, but just hold a newborn child. Have you ever held a newborn? If you were to, in one word, sum up the essence of the newborn, what would that word be?
Joy.
Joy. So that's a question that Jeannie, my wife, and I have asked of tens of thousands of people all over the globe. And 100% of the time, doesn't matter what culture we're in, the answer is always some variation on the theme of love. It's joy, it's beauty, it's power, it's peace, it's sweetness. That's human life.
Yes.
And we come into the world, and the world starts to put its thumbprints on us. to shut down human life and have us function as the king would have us function, which primarily is out of hostility and fear. And so Yeshua gave 6 keys for becoming a conscious creator, for becoming a superhuman.
Beautiful.
And if we can understand those keys in their original context, then we can start to experience what it takes to produce that result. The problem is that most of those who read those teachings translate them into other languages. I mean, if you look at the average person who's up there pounding on a lectern something about scriptures, how often are they screaming and yelling at us about hell and damnation and punishment? So obviously a person who thinks that it could possibly have anything to do with the Creator, love, has to be mistaken and can't tell us in words how to achieve the result of living like a superhuman. Can't do it. Only the person who has the experience can start to describe the experience, and it's difficult for one who's even had the experience to just try to describe it to someone who hasn't. And so the keys become the whole bottom line to of our where the whole man of Yeshua and getting into the actual teaching of how to produce the result of living as a human being, how to truly experience living as a human being. And so the keys that are given, the first one, the most important thing to know, as I see it, in his teachings, and we hear the Greeks saying, the eye is the lamp of the soul. If the light for you is darkness, how deep will your darkness become? Now, think about that for a minute. The eye is a lamp. Gee, I looked in the mirror and I could see, something in there, but it sure wasn't turning the lights on in the room. And if the light is darkness, how can light be darkness? That doesn't make any sense. Let's go back to the first century words. Yeshua is telling us that the construct in our minds called perception, which the Greeks translated as the eye, because it's the organ with which we think we see, we call it sight. There's another whole story behind that. So he's saying perception, the construct of the output of your mind, is a guide through your earthly life. If your lights are out, if darkness rules your perception, then how deep will your darkness become? So let's use an example. We go to Mammoth Cave in Kentucky. Have you been to Mammoth Cave?
I think once upon a time, long, long ago.
I mean, it is unbelievable. I mean, it is very appropriately named Mammoth Cave. So imagine that we tell somebody, we have a clear plastic bag with $1 million worth of diamonds in it. It's sitting right out in the open on the wall of the cave. If you can find it, get out of the cave alive with it, it's yours. And we are going to give you a pen light. And with this pen light, of course, you can see one tiny little part of the cave at a time. Smallest little fragment of the cave at a time. Imagine I sit still for 5 hours and finally shining the pen light into one little piece of the cave at a time. I see the diamonds. And I go rushing off to get the diamonds. But of course, I keep the light on the diamonds so I'll know where they are. And I don't use the light to show me the 30-foot pit that's in front of me. I'm not getting out of the cave alive with the diamonds. Perception is like that. That's what Yeshua was saying 2,000 years ago. So there's some interesting Harvard research that says that the construct called perception comes from a space where 10,000 brain cells are. There are actually 10,000 measurable units of electrical activity going on in the brain. And the max amount of data that you can see in your mind is 9 bits. So the construct that you call perception, people have been taught to believe, mistakenly, that they have a set of windows that they look out into the world with. You don't have any windows to look out into the world. Your eyes are one-way devices. They bring frequencies in. We don't see what's out there. Based on the frequencies that come in and the content resonated in us, we build a construct that looks like, or what we think looks like, the world out there, and that picture's painted on the inside of our eyeballs. So if I'm sitting in a particular situation and my construct is based in rage, I see something to be enraged about. Someone else's construct is based in fear, and they see something to be terrified about. Somebody else's construct is based in love, and they see a space for love and compassion. Are any of those three people living in the same world? No. Each of their constructs is different.
And this really explains the mirroring of quantum physics.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, quantum physics explains this as mirroring, which is fantastic.
2,000 years ago, this man was the greatest psychologist that ever lived and a neurophysiologist. He knew exactly how it worked. He called the construct in the mind appearances. He said, be careful, don't judge by appearances. Don't judge by the constructs in your mind. So here's modern neuropsychology saying 10,000 brain cells are firing, 9 bits of information make up a construct, a picture that you see, and the picture's inside of you. It's not a picture of anything outside of you. It replicates to a degree what's outside of you, so you don't bump into the furniture, but it's not what's out there. It's a picture created by the internal firing of brain cells that's meant to be a guide for your earthly life.
Beautiful.
So you recognize, and I think this is the first key to being a first or 21st or whatever century superhuman, is you got to know what your guidance system is made of and how it works, or you won't know how to drive it. And it's meant to be plugged into a particular power supply. So Yeshua says, when they say to him, you know, you're teaching us all this stuff. What's most important in all this stuff you're teaching? He says, there's a filter in the frontal lobe. I'm going to give you the Aramaic long form before we do the Greek short form. There's a filter in the lobes of your brain called Rachma. And if you keep everything you see will be based in love. It's the fuel, the power supply that's meant to fuel your perceptual mind.
Michael, you glitched out for a minute, and I'm going to ask you, you've got so much power coming through, you're glitching out every now and then, but that we lost a part of that sentence there, so if you could repeat that, that would be helpful. And just kind of stay calm because there's a lot of power coming through and it's glitching us out again.
So what he's saying is that if you can keep your perceptual mind plugged into a proper power supply, then, and this is again the Aramaic understanding of this phrase, I'll give you the Greek in a minute, then your perceptual world will be fueled properly and always give you the highest and best possible. Aramaic long form. Short form, the Greeks tell us that he said, love God, love neighbor as you do yourself. Not even a shadow of what was said in Aramaic. What he's saying is, the word that was translated by the Greeks as love is rachma. It's a filter in the frontal lobes of the brain. If you keep that filter active, then all of your perceptions will be the highest and best possible. And then, tie it back in with the phrase I just spoke of earlier, if the light for you is darkness, how deep will your darkness become? Hostility and fear in Aramaic are darkness. He's saying, if your perceptual construct is accompanied by hostility and fear, how deep will your darkness become? How insane will your life become if you live in that hostility and fear-based state? So Rachma becomes the first key. And maintaining a perceptual system that is fueled properly. You know, anybody got a device in your home or your office or your shop or your car that if you unplug it from its power supply works really well? Nobody has such a device because nothing works unless it's plugged in. The human mind does not work properly unless it's plugged into the power supply it's designed to become plugged into, or to work with. We come in plugged into a proper power supply. The world does its best to unplug us. So first order of business, perception is designed to be fueled by love. If you lose that love, then darkness will destroy you. Keep plugged in, keep connected to the active presence of love, and all will be well in the world.
And that is Rachma, which
well.
is in the frontal lobe of the brain. And what I teach repeatedly is to breathe and smile to open perceptions and intentions of love. It literally neurologically connects us with that Rachma system. And there's other pieces beyond that, but it's the base core of how we get to that love God, love thy neighbor, love thyself. I mean, how do we do that? We do it by activating our true system.
Correct. Activating it and then emptying the system of what doesn't belong. But that's one of the other keys.
Absolutely. Critical.
So perception is a guide or the light for your earthly life. If your 9-bit mind is filled with hostility or fear, how deep will your darkness become? Plug it back into love before you do anything else. If you look at that phrase that the Greeks gave us, what it more properly translates is, have Rachma, when you think of the Creator, when you think of neighbor, and by the way, in Aramaic, the word neighbor means anybody that you think about. You want it the highest and best perceptual system possible. Anybody that you think about as your neighbor, you got to keep plugged into the proper power supply. And then he says, and in the Greek, they translate it as, and love the neighbor as yourself. But in Aramaic, what he says, in order to maintain self. So this filter in the frontal lobes of the brain is not only the power supply that keeps perception on track, keeps intentions on track with love, but it is the gateway for the entryway for human life to enter the human form. When you can trap people in hostility for the gateways closed, there's no human life left.
Wow. I mean, how amazing. We had this advanced soul, star being, God person, whoever he was, Yeshua, just teaching really quantum cosmic principles back then. It's so amazing. And
Exactly.
most of the culture didn't have the capability to understand, but we do today, and it's why we are in the greatest evolutionary leap in human history. What I want to say really quick, Michael, and please hold your thought, is that when we first start entertaining these concepts, sometimes it can be a little bit complex, and we say we need to activate new brain cells that we haven't been using for thousands of years. And this is very explained in my book, 21st Century Superhuman. Also in Michael's work, there's 1,000 hours and plus of radio shows on his website, which is whyagain.org, and a book he's written. He's on the radio every day, 5 days a week, explaining this, and you can call in and talk to him. So we'll put all the links for this under this on YouTube and on the blog post it's in, because it's really key information. And I just want to encourage people, it's something that needs to be studied in order to really get at the deepest level. And because it's sort of like a big leap from where we've been. But please continue. It's just beautiful explanation.
Yeah. Well, 2,000 years ago, Yeshua said, you got to have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. Yes. It's got to be in your construct to be able to perceive it. Yes. And so it's about building brain cells. It's about coming to a new understanding. And one of the challenges with that is kings have been practicing for so many generations that it's in our genes, that automatic response of hostility and fear. And so the new construct becomes a challenge, because we're not just learning something new, we're dissolving old false ideas as well. So that becomes a key. So the first key for that 21st century or first century superhuman, to make some subtitles on number 3 here, is your perception is the light or the guide for your earthly life. If your lights are out, if hostility or fear fuels your perception, you don't need to know anything else. You're in error. You want to correct your perception. Simple. Keep love active in your mind. So that's the first thing to know about. The second key is what to do is to know that Rachma is the key and do the work that it takes to keep it active. So it becomes a daily process. You know, people talk about, well, you know, now that I know this, shouldn't this all just be automatic and shouldn't it be done? No, it's a very deep practice when you step into doing your work, and it takes daily work to that you are designed to function. We are love-based beings, in a world where it's almost gone. I remember doing some research on this about a year or so ago, and I came across a quote from a first century BC rabbi who said, and this is 2,100 years ago, in a world where there is no human life, we must each strive to be human. The striving to be human starts with knowing that I can keep this filter open, this space of rock, this space of love in my mind, regardless of what everybody else does. And when I can't do that, you know, and I can talk about how, well, yeah, but look what they did. They're doing terrible things. They're destroying. Okay, great. I understand that. But that's not what takes you out of your connection to love. So in the space of someone who's doing crazy, bizarre, off-the-wall things, the first order of business for me is not to fix or correct them. The first order of business for me is, what's my work to keep me plugged into love in the presence of that? Because when I do that, I'm empowered to bring healing to that situation. When I get lost, when I get lost in my own rage and guilt and fear and anger at what I believe is at what's going on out there, I'm now part of the fray. I'm now supporting the insanity by the energies I'm engaging in. I'm a house divided against myself. I want things to be loving and wonderful, and they're disgusting, so I'm going to turn on the disgust side. I need to remember, second key, to keep love active in my mind 24/7, 365. Big key in the whole process.
Yes.
The third key in this subtitle for the 21st century superhumans, to me, would be, what's the most important tool? We've gotten the most important thing to know. We've looked at the most important thing to do. What's the most important tool? Well, if I come from 1,000 generations of hostility, fear, rage, guilt, grief, pain, drama, and trauma, and I don't know how to remove those viruses from my structure, then I'm in trouble. And nobody's given us the removal tool. We were told by the Greeks that we should forgive others for their failings because they don't know what they're doing. And yet, when one actually understands first century Aramaic forgiveness, you would never even forgive another in a million years. Stop forgiving people. Stop forgiving yourself. Never do it again. Forgiveness is a tool in the first century with which you went inside yourself and removed the root of your hostility or fear. So the most important thing to engage in as a tool is whenever hostility or fear comes up in you and in the initial phases of doing one's work. And my experience is that for people to start to really truly shift, we're talking 4, 5, 6, 10 years to really start making deep gut level shifts because we've got so many generations. I mean, if you do the math, in just 30 generations of your bloodline, there are in excess of 1.7 billion people. Every thought, every feeling, every inclination, every behavior of those generations is in our genes. If the situation in the world calls forward something from great-great-great-great-grandfather through resonance, then that's going to come up and it's going to tend to take over my thought system, my behavior, and my creative process. That's something from the unconscious becoming the controlling factor in my life. It's interesting, in the Aramaic, it's the only language on the planet that I know that unconscious built into the syntax of the language. If you add the suffix uta, O-O-T-A, to a word, that means that something from the unconscious is impacting perception, decisions, and behavior. So
that is amazing.
It is amazing. And so when I realized that those things are there lying in me, and in the Aramaic, they were metaphorically spoken of as the sins of the fathers. They said that you pass to generations. First of all, you look at that word sin, and it's an archery term. When you fire the target, you miss the bullseye. That's all the Greeks. It doesn't have anything to do with the Greeks.
Let's just repeat that, Michael, because you pointed out again. Sin is an archery term that means missing the target.
Correct.
And the target is connecting with our true design, which is love.
Correct. Yes.
Perfect. And then we have the Harvard statistics that tell us that 95% of our data is unconscious from this generational data bank. And we've only got 5% that we're actually functional in. So when this old data is coming up, we need this removal tool, which is called forgiveness, which was translated as letting someone else off the hook.
Greek pardoning.
Greek pardoning
Was put in the place of forgiveness.
And true forgiveness was removing this data from ourselves when it comes up. And I know, go ahead.
Correct. Well, you hear Yeshua say, you must forgive heart state, back to the heart being unconscious. He's saying, whatever's in your unconscious that you put into your brain's image of picture of someone else, and you say they are this kind of rotten, you're describing your own rottenness, not theirs. The perceptual mind always tells more about the source of its perceptions, the constructs that it makes, than the world that it thinks it's looking at. So when he says you must forgive from your heart, everything that you rage at somebody else for is your work. And so forgiveness is the tool with which you go in and remove every virus of the generations. When you realize that, that one particular phrase, 4 generations, that's 31 lives. I mean, stop and think. On planet Earth, in the last 75 years, we have slaughtered over 170 million people. Who of us has not been impacted by that in the last 4 generations? That's about 4 generations in the last 75 years. Those numbers come from Columbia University. So many people we've loved. Who wasn't impacted by that? Who doesn't have grief and fear and pain and rage from that in their generational patterns? And so every time I confront something of that fear and rage and guilt and such that comes up, perceptual system, third key to being a 1st or 21st century superhuman is to remove that from my system so that it can no longer impact my perception, decisions, and behavior.
And so how do we do that?
So, excuse me, I was an alarm for my radio show. So short form of that, and people can go to whyagain.org, and over on the right-hand side where all the social media things are, the bottom one is YouTube. Just click that. There's a 24-minute PowerPoint presentation that lays out the core of the whole forgiveness process. Literally 35 years of my work in 24 minutes that a friend of ours put together for us. But in the context of our conversation, the perceptual system is driven by goals. That's the driver. If you want to print to your IBM printer, you've got to have a print driver for that IBM printer. And when you do, it drives the output of the computer so that the printer can understand it. The thing that drives perception is the goals that we load. If we load a goal that recruits information from the unconscious that's based in hostility or fear, then what will happen is our perceptual system will be filled with hostility or fear. And because we've been taught that we've got windows to look out into the world through, we'll think that the cause of our pained perception is out there. No, the cause of every appearance we see in our minds is the content of our mind recruited into activity by the goal that we're holding at the moment. And this is such a turnaround from the way the culture looks at forgiveness. In essence, the word forgive is shebag, and it means to cancel. Now, if I've got an upsetting situation going on with Joe, can I cancel Joe? Well, I guess I could, but that would be murder. It might not work out too well. Can I cancel myself? Well, that would be suicide. Not a really great idea. But at every moment of my life, I can always locate and cancel the way that I want it to be. So when I realize that there's a way that I want it to be, and my perceptual system is showing me something different, and my perception contains some form of hostility or fear that's degrading the quality of my perception, the key way into getting to the hidden root, the unconscious part of my perceptual system, is to cancel the goal that I'm holding for the moment. So if I've got someone that, let's say, is really dissing me, and obviously what I want them to do is speak about me lovingly, gently, and respectfully, then my goal at that moment is for Joe to speak about me lovingly, gently, and respectfully. I'm in a rage, my mind tells me, because Joe isn't speaking about me lovingly, gently, and respectfully. He's dissing me. Well, I just lied to myself. I'm in a rage because there's rage in me. But I keep it hidden from myself by making pictures of other people as the cause of my rage. And for anybody that's in our audience, I'll invite you to notice that if you've been through a particular painful reality 87 different times with 42 different people, you're the only one that was there every time. Everything that shows up in your perceptual system is about you. So if I say Joe really enrages me so much when he disses me like that, then I want to look at the goal that I hold for Joe. I want him to speak about me lovingly, gently, respectfully. And then I'm going to cancel that goal. What happens when I cancel that goal is that perception collapses. And when it collapses, you can almost imagine, it's coming from deep in the unconscious. Who knows how much data goes into a particular perception. You can almost visualize that perception collapsing in on itself. And it leads us right into the core of where our hostility and fear is stored. So now, instead of only seeing our rage, our fear, our sadness, whatever, through the projection on someone else, we get to go directly to it. And when we go to that part of our mind and bring the active presence of love, the earlier of the keys, then bringing that active presence of love to that dissociated content in my own mind brings healing to it. That's forgiveness. The removal of the hostility and fear-based thinking is the process of forgiveness. So the third key in being a first or 21st century superhuman, I would offer, would be the tool of forgiveness. And the short form is that's how it's done. If people go and, jump on the YouTube link, there are, several dozen audios or videos on our YouTube channel. But in particular, look for the PowerPoint, and that will just go through in a very succinct way 35 years of understanding of how the forgiveness process works.
I know I listened to many hours of your radio shows and was able to, kind of get how this worked in my own system. And in a way, it's kind of, in modern terms, it's kind of like defragging the computer, because really it's almost like we have a computer program inside of us, and it's got some old data in it that needs to be removed. And this is the removal tool. And it's a quantum tool. It was taught to us by Yeshua in the Aramaic, and it was actually even held in the Aramaic language.
Yes.
Which was grounded on the planet 5,000 or 6,000 BC. So as a complete language. And
it's literally the virus removal tool.
Yes.
And anything unlike love, any form of hostility or fear in the human system is a virus. Imagine a kid who's born today, and today all computer virus software is disappeared from the earth. And 20 years from now, he's grown up and he's studied computer science and he's a computer genius, and he goes to the office every day and he spends 7.5 hours of his day fighting off viruses on his computer, half hour of productivity. And he says, I had a really great day at work today. I got a whole half hour of productivity. The other 7.5 hours I spent removing viruses. And he would think that was normal. Non-humans function today with hostility and fear. Their minds, their relationships, their finances, their businesses run by viruses. And if they get a half hour of, loving productivity in relationship with their spouse in a day, they go, wow, we had a really good day. And that would be the analogy. Hostility or fear simply does not belong in an actual human system.
Right. And we're really designed to operate without blame, fear, judgment, hostility, and control. And once we learn this removal tool and how to get rid of those things when we see them being mirrored to us in our reality because of our own old data, we really change our lives. And I can testify to that. It's fantastic. And it doesn't mean it doesn't mean that challenge is over. It's a walk of mastery, but it gets easier, as we learn how to remove this data and how it works. We allow ourselves to return to love and heart coherence more readily.
Yeah.
So
go
ahead.
Somebody convinced us that we get more of what we wanted out of rage and intimidation and control than out of love. And it's a lie. Like, who taught you that? Whoever convinced you that was true? Like, when was the last time the cockles of your heart were really warm, giving somebody something they wanted when they puked all over you? It's never happened.
Right.
What do you want to give to the person who cherishes you, who honors you, who takes care of you, who nurtures you, who's with you? You want to give them whatever they want, right? That's just the natural human way. That's what human life does. But the whole game's been turned around because human life's been pretty much disappeared and non-human life has taken over. Us living fear-based life.
So we've got about 15 more minutes, Michael. So I'd love to hear the additional 3 keys, because this is a wonderful conversation, and I know you'll have to go on to your radio show shortly, but please lead us on here.
So 4th key is the most important block. If you don't understand in the Aramaic context this block, it's going to be really tough to ever work through anything. And the block is Satan. Now, most people go, oh, come on now, you're not going to start with that antiquated stuff, are you? If you don't understand this concept, you are in deep, deep trouble. In the Aramaic language, Satan is not a dude with a red suit, a tail, and a pitchfork. It's not a capital S word. It's a lowercase word. It means the resistor, one who misleads. And so you look at the average person when they're in their upset and their rage, and you suggest to them for 1 second that maybe they're involved in their lives and they're responsible. What do? They go into resistance. No, that's not true. And then they've got a whole story about Joe and how Joe's the problem in their lives. They're totally and completely misled. They're trapped in Satan. Most of the world lives trapped in the Aramaic concept of Satan, the resistor, being in resistance to truth, and one who misleads. It was interesting. Jeannie and I just watched a video. It was a 2-hour video on the life of St. Augustine. I learned a lot of things about this guy I didn't know. One of them, there are only 2 people on the planet that I've ever seen who understood that Paul, when he wrote about love, this beautiful piece that everybody talks about, many people use it in their wedding ceremonies and such, about 80% of it is pure garbage. But most people don't realize that. Paul's talking about, love is not vile, it doesn't do this, and all this junk stuff in this quote from Corinthians. I rewrote that about 8 years ago and said, if Paul hadn't had all these challenges, you listen to Paul and he says, he's had this full-blown near-life experience, this light experience. And it's awesome for him. And, being a killer, a professional killer that goes and hunts people down for doing religious things he doesn't agree with, it's a pretty heavy-duty lifestyle. So he has this full-blown light experience, and he gets that there's a different game to play. But he doesn't know how to do his work. He doesn't have the tools of Yeshua, never met the man, can't teach it to the world. That's why so much of the so-called Christian world is in such a mess, because they're still following Paul. But you listen to Paul, and Paul says, why is it the things I would not do, the things I hate are what I do, and the things I would do, I cannot do? He's being controlled by his unconscious mind, by this mind that he has no idea how to get into and clean out. And so recognizing that, when he goes into his resistance, when he's lost in somebody else is the problem out there, he's in trouble, just like all of us. So this idea of Satan being the resistor, one who misleads, we are misled by the hostility and fear-based content in our minds to create pictures of what we think are other people that are the problem in our lives. And most people live all of their lives trapped there because they actually think they got a pair of windows that look out there in the world. And no such thing exists. You've never seen anything outside of you with your body's eyes. Excuse me.
And it's amazing, Michael, how many thousands of years this has been the program that's been running humanity in, we'll call it the power over civilization. It's the exercise that we've managed to operate in duality by going into the darkness of living outside of love. And it's amazing how long this program has been running our system and how we think. So it's a big leap to step out of that and say, and what's really beautiful now is quantum physics, that we can understand it, is backing up what is said in the Ancient Aramaic. And I know I've heard you say the even the letters are like almost an energetic form in the Aramaic.
Well, actually, the Aramaic language, it's the only language on the planet that I know of that's like this. The letters are actually 3D shadows of the turning of the atomic structure of the elements.
That's amazing.
An element moves, and if you have a light shone on it, there'd be a 3D shadow thrown by it. That's the Aramaic letters, those shapes. So it's based in the actual creation. It's not based out of people's heads like every other language.
Wow,
So,
I'm amazed you guys even figured that out.
yeah. Well, actually, that was a guy, you can check it out, a guy named Stan Tannen. Actually, that piece together. I didn't. That was Tannen's work. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And so we've got a language that's actually based in the physics of the atomic universe. And then we've got languages that are based in people's heads. Those languages are called Babel. We're babbling right now.
And the languages that kind of emerged out of Aramaic are Sanskrit, Hebrew, Arabic, Polynesian, and Lakota. Is that correct?
Yes.
Or those thought, so those are kind of, so those kind of tend to carry with them this resonance of truth in some of their principles.
Correct.
How they're based.
The lost tribes, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So we look at this idea of Satan, and then of course, if you understand that Satan isn't a dude that's out to get you, that it's an internal process, then you got to figure out where the resonance of Satan is. And Satan has a number. And, you know, if we have let's say we have a situation where we've got an audience of people, and we bring somebody into the room that stands up at the front of the room and does something that everybody in the room agrees is really terrible. Now, if what that person did, as most people say, they made me. When he did that, he really made me. One person might say angry, sad, afraid, screaming, raging, crying, running out of the room, I got to escape. Everybody's perception in the room is going to be different. Why? If what that person did, that terrible thing they did, was the cause, then obviously everybody in the room would have exactly the same experience. But everybody doesn't. Why? Because we each have a storage system of information, and stored in that storage system is past dynamics that come forward looking like the present. So we're looking at the atomic structure of our physiology, and what is it made of? Well, if you talk to a modern day physiologist, the element in their so-called body is carbon. Carbon is made up of, a carbon atom is made up of 6 electrons, 6 protons, and 6 neutrons. 666. The number of the Antichrist. We live in the mind of love, nothing religious about it. We either live as human beings. A newborn child is in the mind of Christ, is in the mind of love. It's birthright. We're all designed to live there. Yeshua came back and said, in the presence of all of the worst insanity, I'm going to live as love. That's just the way it is. And so we see him doing that. And then if that living love is living in the mind of Christ, then what would the Antichrist be? It would be that which takes us out of the mind of love. And that's always what's stored in our own carbon-based memory system. It's unique and individual. But the world, the Greeks taught us it was some dude or creature out there that's out to get us. We've been tricked again. It's in here. The work is in here to clean up what's going on the inside. So that would be the 4th key.
2 more to go. And
2 more to go. So the 5th key would be the most important request to make. And when you realize, so to speak, you've got a 9-bit processor, you've got, let's just go 30 generations, lives. Do the math. 2, 4, 6, 8, 6, pardon me. 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 2024. Multiply that out in 30 generations, you're at 1.7 billion people. And you've got a 9-bit processor. How are you ever going to clean up that genetic structure, that generational database? It's never going to happen if you're out there on your own. Yeshua taught 2,000 years ago that there was a feminine elemental force in us that in Aramaic was called Ruka Dukudsha. Ruka in Aramaic is a word that represents the elemental forces. Ruka Dukudsha was a specific elemental force designed for humans, who, by definition, if invited into activity, would undo the effects of our errors and teach us the truth. So there's literally an elemental force in us that will teach us everything that we need to know. And it will always honor our free will. It will never interrupt or interfere with our free will. If there's something we want to hold on to in the way of our rage or guilt or grief, we can be stuck in it forever. But when I realize that when I feel powerless over this Goliath that's arising in me, built out of rage and grief and pain, that I have a helper if I invite her into activity. And this feminine elemental force called Ruka Dekudsha will undo the effects of ours. That means not just the energies that are moving inside of us, but all of the energetic effects in the quantum universe, past, present, and future, will shift by her power.
I love that. So how do you invite Ruka Dekudsha to this feminine elemental principle that's built into us to assist?
Well, you know, you've coded it down to smiling and breathing. That's key. And then making the request. Ruka, I need help here. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to handle this. I'm just like, I need assistance. I need support. So you go back to Yeshua talking about this feminine elemental force to the one of the elders from the temple, and he tells this elder about it, and the elder's like, what are you talking about? He says, well, you an elder of the temple, you don't know this. And then he talks about a different elemental force that they do have some understanding of. He uses the example of the wind, which another is Ruka, the wind. He says, you know the wind, you don't know it directly. You know that it's been here by the effects it created, but you can't know it directly. We can't know this force directly until we undo our hostility and fear, and we live in connection with that physiological presence of love in us that will guide us and direct us when we ask for support.
Beautiful.
So that would be the fifth key. And then the sixth key in Aramaic would be one's prayer life. And here's another one that's been totally turned absolutely backward, because we've been taught that prayer is putting your order into the cosmic gift catalog. Got nothing to do with it. Prayer is not about telling God what God should be doing for us today. The word prayer in Aramaic actually means to set a trap for love or for God. And most people, what do you mean to set a trap for God? What does that mean? You know, my background's in physics and electronics. Every energy system has an antenna. Antenna systems bring through more power by aligning. When I come into alignment with the elemental forces in which I live, move, and have my being, then power flows through me. This specific antenna, of all the antenna of the creatures on the earth, this one called human, is designed to actively capture the active presence of love and bring it into the world in full activity, and to be able to do it consciously. So prayer, you know, if you look at the Lord's Prayer, Yeshua is asked by his disciples, teach us to pray. Oh, I'm not hearing.
We lost you for a second, so
Okay.
just if you can start your sentence over again.
So you look at the disciples, and they said to Yeshua, teach us to pray. Now, if let's say I were a voice teacher, and I said to you, I can give you voice lessons, and you said, well, Michael, teach me to sing. Would I break into song to teach you to sing? No, I'd give you some instructions on saying, oh, here's how you work your vocal cords, here's how you need your mouth to hold, you know, I'd give you instructions. So the disciples said, teach us how to live as the active space of love. And so he says, here's how you do it. He's not giving words to sit and repeat on Sunday morning. He's saying, here's the how-to. Here's the instruction set for living as the active presence of love. And so the sixth key that he gives us is we need to move through the world, align with and as the active presence of love. And as we do that, that presence will bring healing to any and everybody that we touch.
Beautiful. You were kind of connecting it to the Lord's Prayer, and we kind of lost you there.
Okay. So my input was that the disciples said to Yeshua, not teach us to pray, like put an order into the cosmic gift catalog, or tell us what our order should be. They said, teach us how to live as the active presence of love, to be the conduit through which love shows up actively in the world. And then he gives us a set of instructions for how to do that. So what people call the Lord's Prayer is clearly not a prayer.
And so there's a good translation. There's a translation of that at your website.
On my website, yes.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it's not a translation. What I put there is an interpretation for today's crowd. Different things are going to be needed to align with love. different stresses are going on in the average person's life than what's happening 2,000 years ago in the desert.
And we also have the Beatitudes there, which are another instruction, which are
another set of instruction, another how-to. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's all about the how-tos.
Mhm.
And the how-tos are basically lost in Greek, and that's why most people are running around, come to bring you the love of my master Christ, but if you won't accept it, I'll kill you.
So do you want to go through our 6 keys really quick, and then I'll just do a closure with how to access more of this information?
Sure. The 6 keys would be, first of all, you need to know that perception is the light for your earthly life. It's meant to be fueled by love. First key. Second key is the most important thing to do is to keep this filter, Rachma, open. Keep love present within your physiology, 24/7, 365. The third key, the most important thing to do is to be continuously removing that which is unlike love so that you can fulfill that living in the presence of love. The fourth key, the resistor, the one who misleads, is inside of us. It's all the data stored in carbon-based memory that presents itself as a present moment experience and convinces us that it's a live experience right now. Anything that is replayed out of the cellular structure from the past and is formed into pictures is a lie. And it simply is trying to pretend to have life, but there's no life in it. We're made for a present moment live experience. That can't come from carbon-based memory. And then the next of the keys would be the most important request to make would be to ask Ruka for support, Ruka de Kudsha, that feminine elemental force, to continuously bring her into activity so that you have awareness of that guidance system that's there for you. And then the fifth one would be to know that the word prayer means to become the space where active love shows up in the world. And so you make a goal of every instant of your day to be living in that presence of love, physiologically, mentally, emotionally, relationally.
Michael, I want to thank you so much. It's just so well put, and there is a science to this. It's not we're not accidental tourists here, and we have come forward in the time when the Christed consciousness will fill humanity, and that is the time called the shift of the ages by the ancients. We can call it the Buddhic consciousness because Buddha also used the Aramaic language. So, and I believe Zoroaster did as well. So these teachings have been attempted to be brought through to humanity for a very long time. Sorry, a little buzz behind me here. So Michael's work can be found at whyagain.org, W-H-Y again. And you're going to do your radio show right now, 5 days a week. People can listen to you live. They can ask you questions about their personal lives. There's over 1,000 hours of radio shows that they can listen to at your website. There is a lot on the Khabouris Manuscript, the Lord's Prayer, the Beatitudes, some of these beautiful teachings, 5,000 pages at your website that you and your beautiful wife, Jeannie, maintain.
Actually, it's up to probably close to 8,000 pages now.
Wow, my
If
gosh.
people want to tap into the radio show from 1 till 2 o'clock Eastern time, 5 days a week. Most people, key into it by telephone. They've got a long distance.
And what is that number?
People can just call into the show at 646-200-4169, 1 till 2 o'clock Eastern time, 5 days a week. And you're having a personal conversation with us, and our goal for that radio conversation is with people to guide them in how to use these tools.
Perfect. Awesome. And I know you also do several, whoops.
I say so that we can learn how to use them too.
Yes. And I know you also do several intensives every year, which are retreat where people can really get this material integrated into their lives. I have been at and assisted with some of your retreats, and I just love them. So thank you and Jeannie so much for the work you're doing, traveling from place to place and continuing to teach these things. And thank you for being here with us today. These really critical keys to how to be a 21st century superhuman. There's a science behind it.
Yay. I admire what you're doing. Blessings. We'll look forward to the next time we get face to face. Take care.
Thank you so much. We'll do another show, and I want to just thank everyone. Please breathe, smile, align with the love within you, and learn how to offload your own old data so that you can live in this joyous newborn human state. Many blessings to all. Much love, and see you soon. Thanks, Michael.
Bye-bye.
Adios.